In March of 1981, 18-year-old Dwayne McCormick was found dead in his Sioux Falls bed. The murder weapon? A hammer.
His roommate, 28-year-old Jeffrey Lynn Howard, appeared to be on the run and was arrested in Georgia, charged and later convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Is it possible an innocent man has been locked up for 41 years for a murder he did not commit?
In tonight's Kettleland News investigation, Angela Kennedy reveals evidence that points to another killer and the role new DNA technology could play to potentially exonerate Howard.
At age 28, Jeffrey Howard was no angel, but rather a convicted criminal who struggled with addiction.
Drinking too much, using too much, hanging around the wrong people, something I shouldn't have been doing. I got Dwayne involved in these people too, and that didn't help any.
Dwayne McCormick, 10 years his junior, didn't know Howard when he agreed to be his roommate. The two did not always get along.
Jeff Howard he stole Dwayne's car. He stole it. I heard him say that to my dad. I heard my dad say, let's file a police report.
Dawn Thomas is Dwayne's first cousin. She was a sophomore in high school at the time. You think that Dwayne was afraid of Jeff Howard?
Yeah, Dwayne started sleeping with his feet against the door. He wanted to feel when Jeff came in. I don't know if he used the word scared. He didn't trust him.
Howard describes that argument over McCormick's car a little differently.
I come back with the car. I was kind of explaining it to him. Maybe I was in a harsh voice or something about, if you're going to live this lifestyle, you need to not be calling the police and all this stuff.
That was the day before McCormick was found dead in his bed with a wound the size and shape of a hammerhead above his eye. A hammer was hanging in the kitchen, and police believed it may have been used to kill McCormick. According to the police report, the head of the hammer appeared to have blood on it, but later the lab determined it was not blood. The screen for the kitchen window was lying in the parking lot. The curtains inside were torn down, and police thought the perpetrator entered through this window. When McCormick's uncle came to pick him up that morning for work, the front door was ajar.
As I understand it, he had a roommate. Is that roommate a suspect in this case?
Well, I would just say we haven't located the roommate as yet.
The day after McCormick was killed, Howard took off for Georgia with McCormick's backpack.
Why was he on the run? Why did he steal my son's backpack and take off?
Dwayne McCormick's mother and sister live in Washington State and have no doubt Howard is the killer. But Howard says he can explain why he left town with McCormick's backpack.
We talked about, me leaving and, him sending my stuff down to Georgia because I said I was going to call my friend and set up to get down there. And so I got the backpack with him and asked him if I could just, take that. And he had no problem,
Howard was apprehended in Georgia and stood trial for murder. The South Dakota Department of Corrections did not grant us an on-camera interview with Howard. I was only able to talk with him over the phone. For 41 years, Howard has claimed the state got the wrong man.
I didn't understand. I mean, why would somebody kill Dwayne? For what reason,
Things didn't look good for Howard. The now retired prosecutor in the case, Steve Miller, tells Kettleman Investigates it was a powerful circumstantial evidence case.
Jeff had said all over the place, I'm going to kill that skinny blonde kid.
Did you ever say you wanted to kill him? Were you angry enough you would have said those words?
No, ma'am. I would never say that, no.
And the jurors would have to decide for themselves the innocence or guilt of Jeffrey Lynn Howard.
McCormick's sister testified at Howard's trial that the backpack was her brother's and had an encounter with Howard she will never forget.
I was standing in the hall when they were escorting him out of the courtroom. Now you got to keep in mind, I was 16 years old. Young, naive girl. He growled and lunged at me.
However, there were no direct witnesses, no confession, and no physical evidence that Howard killed his roommate. The state's case against Howard hinged on one particular witness, Darryl Farley, who went by the name of Pete. Farley, a convicted felon, had a long criminal history. Farley gave police a statement 2 days after the murder, saying that Howard admitted to him that he killed McCormick. Pete Farley also later told police he found the hammer he said was missing from his house in the basement. Then, before he was set to testify, Farley claimed he had amnesia from a fight. According to a quote at the time from prosecutor Miller, without Pete Farley, We don't think we have much of a case. The next day, Farley admitted he did not have amnesia and took the stand. According to trial transcripts, Farley told the jury he saw Howard the morning after McCormick was murdered, sleeping on his couch. Farley testified Howard told him he was leaving town and told him, "I may have killed that kid that I live with," and that the expletive had embarrassed me over bringing that car back late. 2 other witnesses also testified Howard said he was going to kill McCormick after the argument involving the car. The jury found Howard guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Pete Farley completed suicide 2 years later. Then people began coming forward with new information in the case.
After Jeff was convicted, he started having people coming out of the woodwork saying Pete had actually confessed this crime to them and had taken steps to essentially frame Jeff for the crime.
Andrew Marquardt is an attorney with the Great North Innocence Project, which has agreed to take on Howard's case. Marquardt is working with law students at the University of South Dakota.
We actually have 5 people who claim to have heard Pete Farley confess. All of them are dead.
Those affidavits range from saying that Pete Farley came into a bar and was bragging how he set up Jeff Howard and that the hammer was his, not Jeff's. Another witness says Farley told him he went to get the stereo where Jeff had lived and didn't mean to hurt anyone, but while there, the boy woke up, so he hit him. After seeing the blood and after removing his fingerprints around the area, he took the boy's car and left. Farley's best friend said that more than once Farley talked about sending a guy to prison for a murder he committed. And Farley told another man he was forced to falsely testify against Jeff Howard so that he wouldn't have to go back to prison himself. Another affidavit claims Farley was pressuring potential witnesses to testify against Howard.
But we have statements from other people who are alive who know from Jason that they heard his father confess, including his sister, Stacy Farley.
And I still love him, but it is very hard.
Stacy Farley is Pete's daughter. She was 11 when her younger brother Jason said he'd overheard his dad talking on the phone.
Jason heard that Pete told somebody over the phone, "I killed someone with a hammer," and that someone else was doing the time.
Pam Prestige is Pete Farley's first wife. They were married when she was just 15.
I went through several beatings with him, many beatings, but until finally, he just left. I kept going back. I had 3 children.
She was raising those 3 children with her second husband when her son Jason dropped that bombshell on the family.
We just got it reported so we could have it off our conscience, and so Jason could go on. It really bothered Jason, and he was adamant, never changed it.
After Stacy became an adult, she knew she had to bring this new evidence forward. Her brother Jason isn't here to do it. He too completed suicide at the age of 24.
I carry it. I do. I feel bad for that guy because I've known about this my whole life, and I kept quiet.
Beyond that, we have evidence from living witnesses. Pete Farley took steps to set up a phony alibi.
Farley's second wife, Vicki, came forward in 2017 to say she had lied for him. The truth is, she wrote, "The night that Dwayne McCormick was murdered, Pete Farley was not home with me as I testified in the murder trial of Jeff Howard in 1981. Vicki said she was afraid of Pete. She also said a hammer was missing from their home, and Pete joked about it with others.
Why was Pete Farley trying to set up a phony alibi for himself and get everyone else to point the finger at Jeff Howard? And ultimately, Pete himself testified against Jeff Howard at trial and gave a very incriminating piece of evidence. Well, the reason is because he's the one who killed Dwayne McCormick, and he needed Jeff Howard to go down so that he could get away with it.
The Great North Innocence Project is now hoping to uncover new DNA evidence on this hammer, initially believed to be the murder weapon.
We're hopeful that Pete Farley would have left a little bit of himself on that hammer and that maybe it's still there.
Farley's living son, James, donated his DNA for testing.
If it's a match to the son's Y chromosome, by definition, it would also be a match to the father's Y chromosome.
However, no matter what new DNA evidence may show, McCormick's family does not believe in Howard's innocence.
I believe that Pete Farley was probably with him, but, who will ever know? Now you've got all these deathbed confessions of deathbed confessions of deathbed confessions. How convenient is that?
If he found God like he says he has, then he would confess to what he did instead of still denying it.
Others believe Howard has spent the last 4 decades in prison for a crime he did not commit.
I just want justice. I want the right thing to be done. It's wrong. It's wrong. And we want to believe that had our dad chose not to commit suicide, that he would have done the right thing.
If we find DNA matching that profile on the hammer, we can conclude with a very high degree of confidence that Pete Farley touched that hammer and that he used it to kill Dwayne McCormick.
That would, in a sense, be the smoking gun.
Yeah.
I asked Howard what he would do if he were set free.
So much I want to do, I don't know if I can get it all done. I'll be, pushing 70 in a couple of years, but just loving my family and the people that supported me.
Howard was denied his appeal and exhausted his legal avenues to try to introduce new evidence. But after hearing all of the statements about Farley, the South Dakota Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously recommended a commutation of his sentence in 2004 that would have allowed Howard to be eligible for parole. However, in 2011, then Governor Mike Rounds denied it.
And KELOLAND Investigates also spoke with Jeff Howard's wife of 25 years who wrote a book on his case. If you have any information on the 1981 murder of Dwayne McCormick, the Great North Innocence Project would like to hear from you. We have put both Judy's interview and that information on KELOLAND.com.